Hey everyone, it's pretty rare that you hear my voice on this channel, but I'm making this video because lately there's been a lot of discussion around the anti-TAS system that has been created by Mr. Bean and Chatters, as well as the cheating method that it's trying to prevent. I've seen a lot of confusion and misconception around this topic lately, so I wanted to make a video that explains everything in a way that everyone can understand so that we can all have an informed opinion on the anti-TAS system. So, in order to understand what the anti-TAS system is actually doing, we need to understand what it's trying to prevent. Now, bear with me because I'm going to have to do a little explanation of how Mario Kart Wii works and how it processes inputs. So, think back to your Algebra 1 class that you might have taken in middle or high school. One thing that you hopefully learned is what a function is. A function is basically just a mathematical term for something that you can give an input and it will give you back exactly one output. This means that if my function was x squared and I put in 3, I would always get back 9, no matter what. Or if my input was 4, I would always get back 16 instead. The important idea here is that every time you input a number to your function, you should always, no matter what, get that exact same output for that number. So believe it or not, Mario Kart Wii time trials actually work in exactly the same way, except now your inputs are your controller inputs and the output is the movement of your character. If you do the exact same inputs twice, which nobody can physically do, you'll get the exact same run both times. This is why we can record ghosts or create tasks on Dolphin, since the same inputs always will result in the same run. In other words, the run that you get is a function of what your controller inputs to the game. Now, the smart ones among you here might already be starting to see the problem. What if, instead of a real person with a controller providing these inputs to the game, someone were to create a so-called TAS controller that can recreate a predefined series of inputs and use them in a time trial? Now, before, we established that if you put the same inputs into the game, it will always give you back the same run. And while that's useful for creating 4K run recordings in Dolphin or using TAS code to practice, unfortunately, that attribute of the game also leaves open a major window for cheaters to exploit. If someone were to create a TAS on Dolphin and then use this TAS controller to play back the inputs into a real Wii, even one running the current version of CTGP, the run would complete exactly as intended, the ghost would be saved, and the time would be added to the leaderboards, and nobody would be the wiser. Unfortunately, it is rumored that soon a device will be publicly released that can do exactly this, which will make undercover cheating in time trials very easy and very widespread. It's also possible that members of the community have already independently made their own version of this device and could be using it right now, with nobody able to tell. So, here's where the new anti-TAS system comes into play. I really applaud the CTGP team's work on this system because realistically, there are very few ways to solve this problem, and there are even fewer ways to solve the problem that would actually work well. So what they've done in simple terms is edit how the game processes your controller inputs to make it so that the run is no longer a so-called function, where the same inputs can actually lead to different, but very slightly different runs. Technically, this does mean that CTGP will modify your inputs, so that the input that you do on your controller is not always what will happen on the screen. Now, before you immediately discredit this as unplayable, ridiculous, or intrusive, I want you to listen to the remaining part of this video with an open mind because, to be quite honest, that was actually my initial reaction to the system as well. But if you consider carefully what I'm about to say, and also the fact that this will stop this gaping hole in time trial legitimacy, you will come around to be in favor of the system just like I did. So this is going to be a somewhat simplified explanation of what the system does to your inputs because I'm not the one that actually programmed it, but it should give you enough of an idea to make an informed decision about whether it should be required or not. And if this video still doesn't clear that up, Mr. Bean did a long live stream that answered the community's questions in detail and explained basically everything that I did in this video. So I would definitely recommend watching that if you want to know more. So now on to what everyone actually wants to know. How does the system work? So, like I said previously, in order to prevent this cheating method of playing back TAS inputs onto a Wii, you have to change the inputs that the game is receiving so that they don't perfectly follow what your controller is inputting. The anti-TAS system will occasionally and at random pick one input to slightly modify in a way that is within natural human variation and impossible for humans to notice, but will cause any TAS to desync and eventually hit walls or fall off the track because of something called the butterfly effect, which basically makes the difference observed because of these changes larger and larger over time, causing the TAS to no longer be able to even finish properly. With this anti-TAS system, the only inputs that it will randomly change are your analog stick inputs. While that might seem a little intrusive at first, there are tons of safeguards built into place to make it basically impossible to notice. In Mario Kart Wii, your analog inputs are always within a range of -7 to +7. The horizontal inputs from 3 to 7 all charge your mini turbo at the same rate, which is the reason why soft drift is possible. The system is designed to only ever change these inputs by plus or minus 1 unit for 1 frame under a very specific set of conditions. 1. The analog stick must already be in motion. The system will never adjust your analog stick input if it's at rest. 2. The system will never change your input in a scenario that will cause your mini turbo to charge at a different speed. In other words, it will never make you fail to soft drift when your actual input would have resulted in a soft drift and vice versa. The system also tends to concentrate the inputs that it modifies at the beginning of an attempt, as the butterfly effect is strong enough to desync any task eventually after a couple of input modifications. And that's basically it. I personally am in favor of this system because it's well thought out and will be effective in stopping people from submitting tasks to leaderboards. The biggest worry that people seem to have is that you might be able to tell the difference with the system on versus off, but there have already been 3 RTA world records set with it, 2 on Bowser's Castle Shortcut by Emil, and 1 on SNES Mario Circuit 3 by Kasey. There have also been countless top-level, some even world record holder players that have tested the system, and none of them can tell the difference with it on versus off. It is definitely possible that certain ways of playing the game, such as glitches, wall clips, or things that are heavy on stick movement, like Mushroom Gorge with outside drift momentum, can be impacted by the system. So if you are a player who values those mechanics, I would ask that you test this system and report your feedback to Mr. Bean on what you notice, because they seem very committed to making fixes and changes to make the system as unnoticeable as possible. There are definitely some aspects of this discussion that I left out of the video for the sake of time, so if you want a full breakdown of the situation and the anti-TAS system, I do recommend that you go and watch the Mr. Bean VOD that I will link in the description. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and please vote on the poll in the description below before the deadline ends so that your voice can be heard on this very, very important topic for Mario Kart Wii Time Trials.